Hello and welcome to 150 Days of Psalms. My name is Derek Hoven. I'm the pastor at Salem Lutheran Church in Orlando, Florida, where each day for 150 days I am reflecting on one of the Psalms, reading it first and then offering a short reflection. Most of those come out of my own stories and my own journey, people that have touched me in my life. My hope is that in hearing these bits of reflection, you will find that these Psalms speak into your life as well. Today is day 100, which means we are 2/3 of the way into this journey. And as it is day 100, we will read Psalm 100. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Come into God's presence with a song. Know that the Lord is God, our Maker, to whom we belong. We are God's people and the sheep of God's pasture. Enter the gates of the Lord with thanksgiving, in the courts with praise. Give thanks and bless God's holy name. Good indeed is the Lord, whose steadfast love is everlasting, whose faithfulness endures from age to age. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. This is a relatively short psalm, and I would call it a call to worship. You can imagine maybe outside of the temple, somebody standing outside and singing this as people were gathering in. Make a joyful noise to the Lord, all you lands. Serve the Lord with gladness. Enter the gates of the Lord with thanksgiving and the courts with praise. Give thanks and bless God's holy name. It is very much this sense of a call to worship the Lord. And worship is a key part of what we do as people of faith. And for me, it really is what I think of as one of my blind spots as a pastor. I have been going to church literally all of my life. There were a couple of short stints where it took me or us a while to get back into church after a move, but they were short-lived. And so I don't really know what it's like to not have worship be a part of every week. And sometimes every day. When I was in seminary, we had chapel every day. And so that being an experience that's just part of my day-to-day, I don't know anything different. I don't have a time in my life before I was part of a worshiping community and then a change that happened once I became part of a worshiping community. It's just always been part of my experience. Now, I've had conversation with people over the years who would say that they find God in the mountains and at the ocean, and I think that is 100% true that can happen, right? I've been in the mountains and at the ocean and experienced the awe of creation. But for me, there is something different and transformative that happens when we are gathered as part of a faith community that comes together and gathers together to worship together. And even in this time of pandemic where that gathering is happening, maybe not physically, but online, there still is something about that coming not just as ourselves into a relationship with God, but coming as a whole community. And that's where I see this psalm speaking these words of this call to worship. It's to the whole of the church. And when I hear this psalm, I think of people for whom it wasn't easy to answer that call to worship. I think of the woman whose heart was down to 20% function, and she began to spend more and more of her days in hospital beds. But if she wasn't in the hospital on Sunday morning, she was right there in the front row with her hospital bracelet still on, and sometimes even her pajamas. I think of the three men, all over 80, all with walkers, who had shared a pew for years together, and they now came down with those walkers to take those same places and to be in a place of worship and praise together. I think of people who didn't necessarily connect with a worshiping community, but felt drawn into a place anyway, found some sense of calling, that this call to worship like this one was calling them to a community where they experienced a community of faith for the first time, and then began to join in that place's worship and stayed connected. I think of times when worship itself is hard. There was a widow who would come and just cry her way through worship, and the care of the community around her was almost too much to bear, and she would try to sit off by herself, but still answering that call to worship and being in that place. This psalm speaks to all of those situations. And the one that really sticks out for me is a woman who couldn't drag herself to worship anymore. Betsy had been diagnosed with cancer and couldn't drive after a while due to the treatments and the way the cancer had impacted her body. And yet, every Sunday, her faithful husband would wheel her into that place so that she could be where she had been on Sundays for over 7 decades of her life. That call to worship, she still wanted and needed to answer so that she could be in that place of worship that she wanted and needed to be. That's what I hear, and those are the stories and the people that come to mind, those like Betsy, when I hear this call to worship, that it is indeed something for all of us, even when it's hard, or even when it's new, or even when it's something we've done for long periods of time and comes relatively easy. It's all a call to come together in God's grace. Let us pray. Gathering God, your story is one of faithfully bringing your people together. Gathered into Egypt to be fed during a famine. Gathered into the wilderness to escape slavery. Gathered back home after exile. Gathered at mountains and wells. Gathered at fountains and in fields. Gathered again and again to be given new life. Call us together this day, together to worship you, together to be a community of compassion, together to share your love, together to experience your faithfulness, together to live in your grace. Amen. Thank you for joining me for 150 Days of Psalms. Tomorrow we continue with the beginning of the last third of the Psalter with Psalm number 101.